our first speaker is Dr. Abdulaziz Ida. Abdulaziz is a Lebanese microbiologist who was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. He obtained his bachelor's degree at Jacobs University Bremen, Germany in 2014, where he worked on engineering yeast for biofuel production and the separation of messenger RNA molecules using fractionation techniques. He then joined Professor Herbert Hertz's lab for his master's and PhD working within the Darwin 21 project, which aims to establish a global knowledge base of desert, rhizosphere, and the endophytic microbes, and their use in sustainable agriculture systems in arid lands. His research focused on the identification, characterization, and the screening of bacterial collections from desert plants collected around the region for their ability to promote plant growth under environmental stress conditions such as salinity stress. So he has a keen interest for microbial community studies and the application of synthetic communities for promoting plant growth and health, and is now working under the near-term grant challenge grant to apply all the experiment knowledge from the lab to the field. So I'm really feeling honored and happy to announce Abdulaziz. So please welcome Abdulaziz, and I will give this stage to him to talk about his seminar.
Thank you, Bashir, for the kind introduction. So I'll just try to share the screen.
So can you share the screen right now? Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes, everything is perfect.
Okay, perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's KAUST Sustainability Week of Awareness. Today, I'll be talking to you about soil, which is a very precious natural resource, and the microbes that are living in these soils and with the plants, and how we can make use of these natural resources in a sustainable manner to promote agriculture and kind of protect our ecosystem. So I'm working with the Darwin 21 project, which is headed by Professor Herbert Hurt here at KAUST. And we're part of the Hurt Lab Group and part of the Center for Desert Agriculture. So basically, soil is a very precious natural resource. We have food because of soil. We have shelter, so all our houses are made from sand particles that are mixed with cement that makes the foundations of our houses. All the clothes that we wear are sometimes made from cotton, which comes from cotton plants that are grown in soil. In some cases, wood from trees are used as a fuel. Also, our computer chips sometimes contain silicon that is processed from these soils. Also, if you wear makeup or use facial scrubs, sometimes these are actually coming from soil. Not to mention that if you get sick, many of our antibiotics have been discovered by soil microbiologists, and so these all come from actually soil. Not to mention that around 75 to 90% of people living in developing countries rely on these medicinal plants for their health. So as a kind of like a core component of land resources and agricultural development, these ecosystems or soils in general are very under or overlooked in terms of kind of trying to protect this resource. So as you know, kind of soils is also the foundation of our global food production and global food security. 95% of our food is directly or indirectly produced on soil. So if you eat plants or vegetables or cereals that all come from crops that are grown in soil, or indirectly by eating animals which feed on these crops. Therefore, most of our food is actually coming from soil. And this is because soil has three major factors. The first is that soils contain a lot of nutrients that are important for plants that are needed for their growth and development. Also, soil acts as a kind of like a water tank that holds water when you have rainfall, and then this water is then absorbed by plants. The soil kind of acts like a structure or a medium to support the roots of these plants in order for the plants to grow in a healthy manner. And so, the common saying of we are what we eat. So if you have healthy plants, then you have if you have healthy soil, then you have healthy plants, and therefore, when you eat these plants, then you are kind of healthy. And so, most of the nutrients that are absorbed by plants are coming from soil. And so, if you look here at the major nutrients which are coming from the soil, if you imagine that if you have a shortage of any of these nutrients, then you kind of have a shortage. Sorry, if you have okay, so if you have a shortage of any of these nutrients that are required for the plant to grow, then you have kind of a reduction in the crop yield and the productivity of these plants. Also, soils act as a kind of a system for storing water. As I said, when you have rainfall, most of the water is stored in soil. But also these soils act kind of like a filtration system, which can provide us with clean water, groundwater supplies. And this occurs by where the soil traps different pollutants, and they also prevent their leaching into our underground water supply. And it's important to know the difference between a healthy soil and the degraded soil. Healthy soils have a high water holding capacity, so they're able to hold a much larger amount of water compared to degraded soils. And this depends on a number of factors, one of which is the soil porosity. So this is the texture and the structure and kind of the distribution of the different particles. For example, if you have too many large particles in the soil, you have extreme leaching of the water and the nutrients. However, if you have very small particles, that can lead to poor drainage. For example, here you have a degraded soil, and you can imagine if you have a lot of water, if you have a lot of rainfall, this would kind of set off a runoff of water and lead to floods. Also, another factor is the organic matter content. So this is mostly plant material or materials that are degraded and decaying in the soil, either by the action of microorganisms or the decaying of plant material. And there's a lot of studies showing that the higher organic matter content in the soil actually leads to the water being able to retain up to 20 times more water. So it's really important to have a healthy structure of soil that has a high organic matter content in order to have a clean groundwater supply and a healthy soil. Also, as a major, soil is a major player in the nutrient cycle. So I'm just going back to carbon cycle 101, which we all learned during high school. Plants use carbon dioxide from the air and use sunlight energy for their photosynthetic process in order to form carbohydrates, which they use kind of as a fuel. However, studies have shown that plants actually release 20 to 40% of the fixed carbon from their roots into their surrounding soil. And this is usually acts as a nutrient supply for different soil microorganisms. And so these soil microorganisms use the carbon as a fuel for their growth and development. And in turn, these microorganisms can establish kind of a symbiotic relationship with the plant, where they provide the plant with essential nutrients that the plant cannot obtain otherwise. So they can provide nitrogen supplies, phosphate supplies, and sulfur. And this is, maybe you've heard some talks during sustainability talks, as mycorrhizal fungi, which can extend the ability of plants to take up these nutrients, and they can provide nitrogen, phosphate, and sulfur. And so you can imagine also the carbon content that I was talking about, the organic matter, is mostly due to this exudation of carbon from the roots and the decaying of these root materials and plant materials. So as you can imagine, also here you can see in the photo, a lot of this CO2 is being emitted by factories or industrial activities and animals. And so therefore, soil is kind of a key climate change mitigation strategy that helps in sequestering carbon from the air. So plants take up the CO2 from our atmosphere and exude it into the soil for the different microorganisms. And as we know, the greenhouse gas emissions, which are harmful for our environment and our ecosystem and are kind of causing climate change, that from these greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide makes up the vast majority of these emissions. If you look here on the left, this is the annual production of CO2 emissions by human activities. You can see that a majority of them in gray are coming from the burning of fossil fuels, which is used to produce our electricity and so on. However, kind of 20% of these emissions are coming from land use change. So this is when the land is converted from one, let's say, function to another. For example, converting it from a forest land into a cropland, or from a forest into a grazing land, which then kind of removes which is a result of deforestation. And so they're removing all these plants that are sequestering our carbon dioxide. And so you have all these extra emissions. And actually soils have been, through vegetation, have been shown to be able to sequester around 1 petagram of carbon annually. And if we compare it to the emissions that are produced by human activities, this is only even less than 10% of the global emissions. So we really have a problem at hand, that we have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, mainly carbon dioxide, and we have plans that can help us to mitigate this. But due to a lot of human activities, this is actually the opposite is happening. So also, soils host around a quarter of Earth's biological diversity. Imagine that a teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microbes than there are on Earth. There's also more than 1,000 species of invertebrates that can be found in a single square meter of forest soil. And so here, just to show you how it looks like when you have a kind of an ecosystem that's filled with different microorganisms and that are spanning different species. So again, back to soil food webs that we did in high school. You can imagine that there are different players in this food web, primarily the plants, which are growing in the soil that exude these organic matters, or the carbon that I talked about. And then these are acting as nutrients for different microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, and nematodes. And these are then actually food for other insects or other microorganisms, which are then also eaten by higher organisms like birds and animals. So you can imagine that any disturbance in one of the key elements in these food webs can cause a disastrous chain of harmful reactions for the different players in this food web. And primarily the plants play a major and upper role at being the first trophic level of this. And so it's really important that we have plants that are living in healthy soils in order to maintain these food webs and these ecosystems. And the resilience of food webs is usually directly correlated to the fertility of the soil and the health of the soil. And just to give you some functions of the soil biota, or the microorganisms and the different organisms living in soil, is that they are important for maintaining the soil structure. They're important for cycling nutrients. As I told you, they provide the plants with nutrients and the plant gives them carbon back. Also, there have been a lot of evidence that microorganisms form symbiotic relationships with these plants. And this in turn helps the plant grow under different stress conditions like salinity, heat, and drought, but they can also help plants fight against different pests and diseases that are caused also by microorganisms. So it's really important for us to kind of bear in mind that the biological diversity is important for maintaining a healthy ecosystem. And in addition to this, most of these biological aspects of soil health and fertility are quite understudied, and the diversity and in the soil of microorganisms is poorly understood. So these are just a few functions of soils. However, there are way more functions that I'd like not to go so much into detail, but just to let you know that in order for us to have a healthy ecosystem, we need to have a healthy soil. However, as you may know, we are kind of at a challenge. We're increasing in population. We're expected to reach 9.8 billion people by the year 2050. And with this dramatic increase, we of course need to increase our food production. And this is estimated to be around 60% globally and almost 100% in developing countries. And so with this high increase in food production, this puts more stress on our soils in order to live up to this demand. However, we have a big problem is that our soils are being highly degraded due to these mindless human activities and not being sustainable in agriculture. And it's a big problem that our soils are being degraded. It's shown that every 5 seconds, the equivalent of one soccer field of soil is being eroded. So you can imagine something like an area the size of KAUST would be degraded in 5 hours. So this is a really huge problem. And around 33% of soils on Earth are actually degraded. And to add, more fire to this problem is that it takes around 100 to 1,000 years to form just 2 to 3 centimeters of soil. So with these rates of degradation and the soil being so slow to regenerate, we're expected to have 90% of our soils to be degraded by the year 2050, where we will have 9.8 billion people. So this is a really big problem that's kind of underlooked. And I'll kind of tell you what are the main problems of how soil becomes degraded. So a major problem with soil degradation is soil erosion. This occurs usually due to wind or water, like floods or heavy rains, but also it's due to poor agricultural practices. For example, using tillage. So tillage is a practice where the topsoil layer is kind of refurbished in order to, it has a lot of benefits for soil. So for agriculture, it's usually to help have an easier sowing of seeds. However, this has been shown to be really a problem as you are kind of removing the topsoil layer, disturbing the homogeneity of the soil. Also, as I said, there's a lot of land use change, which is causing CO2 emissions. And this is usually really affecting the soil and eroding the soil, especially when you have activities like deforestation, which are removing plants and trees. And therefore you have less carbon, and then you have worse soil structures, and therefore that causes the erosion. Also with these mindless activities, you have a loss of biodiversity. So as we said, there's a kind of a homogeneous ecosystem where you have the soil food web where you have plants and microorganisms living together. So when you're removing all these trees and plants and doing these unsustainable agricultural practices, for example, using a lot of chemical pesticides, in addition to the industry not properly disposing all their wastes, which may be chemicals and heavy metals, and all of these are actually destroying the ecosystem and destroying and leading to a loss of biodiversity. Also, eroded soils do not easily retain water, and so they can trigger flooding, as I showed you with the soil structure and landslides, and they can also kind of decrease the soil's potential to kind of mitigate the effects of climate change. So also other problems that are degrading soils, again, the poor land use changing are causing kind of a nutrient imbalance in the soil. And this is also due to sometimes either incorrect use of fertilizers or excessive application of fertilizers, which it's kind of an unnecessary addition of fertilizers, which can sometimes overcome the constraints to food production. So we do need fertilizers to have higher productions, but sometimes it's misused and the improper use of like chemical pesticides and so on. And these have resulted in the degradation of the soil as well. Also, as I said, the tillage and deforestation are also causing a loss of organic carbon due to removal of plants and so on. And actually, the application of these chemical pesticides and fertilizers are also leading to greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture, and it's accounting for up to 14% of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. So the steady conversion of agricultural forests for improper uses are really destroying the nutrient content and the soil carbon content of the soil. And more improper uses of fertilizers, like excessive use of ammonium-based fertilizers, are actually leading to soil acidification. So this is when you have the pH of the soil going below 5.5. Now, sometimes a lower pH in the soil is important to solubilize different nutrients. However, if it gets too low, then it's harmful for the plants. And this is usually due to the buildup of hydrogen ions. And sometimes when you have heavy rainfall, this rain can kind of like wash out all the base cations and cause their leaching, and then you end up with all these hydrogen ions. Also, the soils are sometimes becoming salinized or solidified, and this is because there you have an increase in a lot of these water-soluble salts like sodium, calcium, and magnesium. And this is sometimes due to the quality of the irrigation water having a high content of sodium and these ions. And as we can see nowadays with climate change, you have rising sea levels, and usually seawater has a high content of salt. So this is also causing a degradation of the soils, and the soil salinity and acidification are really kind of leading to major crop losses. And finally, there's also direct effects of human activity like soil compaction. So this is where you have an increase in the density in the soil, and you have a decrease in the microporosity. So as I said, you need to have, in order to have an efficient water retention or water holding capacity of soil, you need to have the proper porosity. And this usually occurs when you have overgrazing or you mismanage your agricultural field, and this leads to this compaction. And as you can imagine, if you have also a compact soil, this kind of impedes the soil function and impedes the penetration of the roots of the plants that we are going to grow, and also the infiltration of water and gas exchange. And this is actually estimated to decrease crop yields by around 60%. And also, as a factor of human activities, we have the industry not being able to dispose properly of their wastes, and this leads to contamination of the soils either by pesticides or heavy metals, which are affecting not only plants but also our human health, since we eat these plants and we eat the animals that feed on these plants. So how can we solve this issue? How can we take care of our soils? So there's a lot of different ways that we can take care of our soil. First of all, we need to have a proper planning of our land use and managing the agricultural practices there. So we need to see how the environment is, what is the proper way to manage these lands. And in order for us to do this, we have to analyze the soil, not only in terms of its chemical content or its physical content, but also, as we saw, that the biological content or the biological properties of these soils are quite important. Other ways are by using effective irrigation, for us to have a kind of a wise way to use our water resources, but also a wise way to apply our fertilizers and not to have excessive application of these fertilizers. And by that, we can also use kind of organic fertilizers or chemical-free pesticides, or in some way kind of reduce them, or kind of have to some degree chemical and organic together in a way to reduce these harmful effects. Also, as I told you, there's a lot of studies, a lot of evidence coming up that's showing that if you reduce your tillage or actually don't do any tillage, this dramatically increases your carbon content of the soil and therefore improves its fertility and its health. Also, a lot of practices to take care of our soil is to add cover crops. So you can imagine that after you harvest, a lot of agricultural farmers or companies, they just kind of try to sterilize the soil by just leaving it bare. So adding cover crops would really help in kind of managing this and making sure the carbon input is still going to the soil and feeding the microorganisms. Also, others involve crop rotation, so diversifying your crops, terracing, so this kind of prevents soil erosion, integrating livestock. Also, we need to use all the science, research, and knowledge that we gain and try to come up with more technologies where we can use precision-based agriculture. And at the community level, you can also grow plants in your backyard in order to help this, or you can plant a tree in a new forest. And there's a lot of companies and institutes, startups that are kind of integrating all of this, including some startups at KAUST that are using using food waste as organic fertilizers and so on. And so actually there's not one single technology that can help this. However, it would be an integration of different technologies to take care of our soil. Also, this would involve governmental international policies that can help us achieve sustainable agriculture. We can kind of fund research in soil, advancing our knowledge and technologies, investing in sustainable soil management, and having educational programs and awareness campaigns like what the Students for Sustainability are doing nowadays. So I'd like also to thank the Students for Sustainability for bringing this topic for us. So I'll just kind of, because of the time, I kind of want to show you guys what we're doing very quite quickly. I know I'm over time, but in our group in Darwin 21, we're kind of using microbes in order to gear them towards using a pesticide and chemical-free solutions for sustainable agriculture. So basically, we're kind of targeting two major problems: the biotic stresses, which are coming from different insects, fungi, weeds, which are kind of harmful to plants. However, a major problem is these abiotic stresses like extreme temperatures, nutrient deficiencies in soil, salinity, as I mentioned, and these account up to 60% of harvest losses. So our idea is to kind of isolate the microbes, which I talked about, that are living in close proximity with these plants, and they can be in surrounding the roots or inside the plants, which are called endophytes. So our pipeline is quite simple. We go to different regions around the Middle East. We collect desert plants, specifically the root system, and we try to extract the bacteria living in these roots. And then we isolate them, and we try to study them in different ways, the mechanisms by which they promote plants. We try to do a lot of genomic and transcriptomic work in order to study these. However, we also test them on different plants, and we have shown that a lot of these bacteria can help promote the stress tolerance of these plants, so their ability to tolerate salinity stress, heat, and drought. However, this is all nice in order to characterize and publish and promote science and increase our biological knowledge of these biodiversity and soil and plant interactions. However, our major kind of pipeline is to kind of go forward with applications. So how can we test these bacteria on crops that we can use that are beneficial for us to eat? So we have shown that some of our bacteria, like SA187, has been shown to increase the yield, the seed yield, the plant biomass under different stress conditions in actual field trials. So here is an example of our test on Medicago sativa, which is alfalfa, using low salinity or high salinity irrigation, and we showed increases in both the dry weight and the fresh weight. And these alfalfa is used kind of like a feed to animals. But we also tested on different crops like wheat and barley, where we showed a significant increase in the plant biomass, but also the seed yield, which we actually eat in the end of the day. And this is the same case for barley, where we have up to 20 to 40% increases in the yield of these crops. And kind of our direction now is to kind of, as we've seen, microbes or their effect in the field are directly correlated to the different factors that are affecting them. So we need to also see the different climate or the environment where we want to grow the crops. We have to look at the soil. As I explained, the soil is a very important factor in growing crops. So we need to check all the pH, the water content, the type, the structure, the texture of the soil, the water content. But also we need to look at the plants, because there's a lot of studies show that the seeds and the plants actually have their own microbiome and their own bacterial communities. And lastly, but also the agricultural practices like tillage and crop rotation, and these all need to be taken into account when we want to do sustainable agriculture or use microbial inoculants as a way for sustainable agriculture. And this is kind of our framework. If you'd like to read our recent review that we published on how we're going to approach this, what's the proper way, we need the help of course, farmers in order to diagnose the field, the crop, the soil. And on our turn, we are going to, and we have been collecting a lot of bacteria, setting up collections from different plants, different regions, studying their effects, their properties, their potential as plant growth promoters. And then we're currently gearing this in a kind of a way to produce and formulate these microbial inoculants for agricultural applications in a sustainable manner. And so with this, I would like to end with this, that if we take care of our soil, if we have healthy soil, then we have healthy plants, which are also directly eaten by animals, which we also eat. Therefore, healthy plants mean healthy animals, and therefore a healthy life for us. However, with us being increasing in population and not taking care of our environment, all of these are negatively affecting the soil, and therefore we kind of need to reverse our bad habits, our mindless activities, our improper use for our practices in order to have kind of a healthy cycle to produce food and for us to have a healthy life. With this, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank the sustainability group for actually asking me to present this. I think it's a really important issue that we need to take care of to have a healthy life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Abdulaziz. Like, it was really, really nice talk, and it was really insightful. Right now we opened the stage for questions. So we'll have another talk in 1945. So we will still hopefully have 8 minutes. So if you have just questions, please go ahead and ask. So you can either chat or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Yeah, yes, please. Yeah, Rami Al-Batat. So please, if you can open your mic and ask your question.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I have some 3 questions, please, if you allow me.
Sure.
There is a science called toxicoepigenetics. Those are used different gene expression when they are exposed to contaminants in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my question is, does this affect the bacteria or the fungi that exist in the soil? Then they will change their behavior because of the contaminants around them? That's the first.
So are you talking about the contaminants from the soil, or?
Yes, the contaminants exist in the soil.
In the soil,
then
yeah.
it will affect the bacteria based
Yes.
on the rules of toxicoepigenetics.
Yes.
That's my question.
Yeah.
And do you allow me the second? Or,
sure, go ahead.
There is a mycologist, American mycologist called Paul Stamets. He's specialized in fungi. He explained there are 2 million types of fungi exist in the world. And my question is there fungi that they can absorb poisonous gas and CO2 or greenhouse gas, and then put them back in the soil, or by different chemical reaction change them to a different style? Because I'm currently reading this Paul Stamets, but I couldn't find this information until now. Maybe you can help me with that.
Sure.
Yes.
So first, I'd like to say I have a very humble knowledge of soil and fungi. I mostly work with bacteria. However, I know that a lot of bacteria, I'm sure that they are affected by these contaminants, depending on what the contaminants are. But however, in some cases, a lot of these bacteria are actually used as a bioremediation kind of solution, where they can be, first, they can tolerate a lot of heavy metals, and they can be used to kind of remediate these soils and remove these toxic compounds from the soil. Whether if I know any studies that show the toxic compounds on the bacteria, I have not read any, but I'm sure there are some compounds. Maybe if you later send me the compounds or the toxic compounds that you're talking about, we can check this over. With regards to the fungi, I've never heard about fungi being used to take up CO2. This is new to me, actually. But I know that most fungi are actually kind of form a symbiotic relationship with plants, and they get their carbon from the plants or from other players like bacteria. So there have been studies that show there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship between also microbes, so microbe interactions, where bacteria and fungi can help each other to acquire nutrients. And in some cases, there are some studies where the bacteria, the fungi, and the plant kind of act in a specific way, that the bacteria solubilize phosphate, the fungi take this phosphate up through different distances, provide it to the plant provides carbon, and the carbon goes to the bacteria. So, but in terms of fungi alone, if they are free living and taking up CO2, I'm not really sure.
So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you a lot.
Okay, great. And also we've got one question from Justin. So please go ahead, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aziz, for your talk. It was very interesting and very clear. I had a question regarding your research. You were saying that you're studying different bacteria to see a little bit their potential to enhance plant abilities and yield, basically. Did you notice that, so I'm expecting like in the future, you might want to sell maybe a certain bacterial mix. And are you planning to do something more like targeted to a specific plant species, or it's more like a mix that will be universal? Because I do believe that you have different bacteria interacting with different plants. Yeah,
so that's correct. So if maybe if you look back at my image here, so actually we're kind of now in our way, we've targeted, let's say, wheat, barley, and we've tried alfalfa with 1 or 2 or 3 maybe bacterial species. However, we know that there's a host effect where depending on the host genotype, that controls the microbial community. So which means that depending on the species of the bacteria and the plant, the effect can be different. So what we're kind of doing now is to test a range of bacteria, either as single inoculants on different plants in different regions, under different agricultural practices, so open field or greenhouse or hydroponics with different plant species, lettuce, cucumber, tomato, in different areas, because different areas means that there's different environment, there's a different soil, therefore there's a different soil structure, pH, and so on. So this, we're kind of now part of the NTGC grant is to kind of screen several bacteria, either alone or as a community. So as a community, we would need to test the microbe interactions, if they have a negative effect on each other, and if they function as a syncom or as a community, and that maybe promotes, have a higher promotion of crop yields. And actually there are some studies that show if you have a community, it's better than a single inoculant. And if you have communities that cover more than one domain, so like bacteria, archaea, fungi, it would have a even better promotion. So this is what we're kind of working now on, to kind of isolate not only bacteria but also fungi, and kind of have these synthetic communities for agriculture.
Okay, thank you. And I just have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
Could it be that a bacteria that is having positive effect, if it's too high in population, might be then negative for the plant?
Yes. So we've done at a laboratory scale some experiments where we test different concentrations of bacteria, and we've seen that very high numbers of bacteria can have a negative effect on the growth of plants. So we're also, part of our process or our pipeline is to optimize kind of the dosage of the bacteria. And we're also we're formulating it in a different way, and also the delivery either as a powder or coating the seeds, and we're also measuring the dosages accordingly. So yes, to answer your question, yes, it can have a harmful effect depending on the concentration and the bacteria.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Very clear.
Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you so much.
I can see one question asking soccer field in 5 seconds. Is it a figurative phrase or an actual fact? It's an actual fact. Yes. Maybe the KAUST one is figurative because I did the quick calculation, but more or less it's true.
I think that's also really interesting information as well. Like,
yeah, that's
also, yeah. I would like to say, so if you want to watch, if you really found it really insightful and would like to watch this again, we'll put the recording later on our YouTube channel. And also, people were asking if we can get the slides, so we'll talk with our speaker and if he's also willing to share, so we can share it later on with the people in the email list. So hopefully,
no problem with that.
It will be really helpful for the people as well. So yeah, as I said, Abdulaziz, it was really insightful talk, and I also have some questions, but we are running out of time.
Maybe after the talk.
Yeah, personally, because it was a really interesting topic.
Yeah, thank you very much for offering me to give a talk and for organizing this week. It's actually very important for us to have awareness campaigns like this.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really insightful.